Welcome back. This time we're talking about Star Trek Beyond, the third film in the rebooted Star Trek franchise and the first not directed by JJ Abrams. And I have to say, for a Star Trek film directed by Justin Lin, who gave us the 4th, 5th, and 6th Fast and Furious movies, and co-written by Simon Pegg, who wrote such films as Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End, Star Trek Beyond is exactly what I would expect a Star Trek film directed by Justin Lin and co-written by Simon Pegg would be like. It's an action-filled thrill ride that will keep you laughing from start to finish. It's a flawed film, to be sure. It's ludicrous. There's plot holes, there's conveniences. Honestly, it's not as well produced and directed as the previous two films. But the word you're going to hear me say a lot in this review is the word fun, because this movie is just simply a lot of fun. And that's why, for the most part, I was able to ignore the problems with this movie and just sit back and have 2 hours of fun entertainment. Which, as a Star Trek fan, I will freely admit is not typically what we expect from our Star Trek movie. And we kind of expected to be on the higher end of the science fiction spectrum. So for the Star Trek fans out there who go see this movie and say, this is not a Star Trek movie, this is not what I expect or want from a Star Trek movie, I really can't argue that point. What I can say is I just simply enjoyed this movie from start to finish. Especially after Star Trek Into Darkness, which was a film I really did not enjoy at all. I know I promised an in-depth review of that film, and that's forthcoming. Hopefully it'll be up later this weekend. Really, it was a film that tried to be that high-minded Star Trek film and simply failed due to a weak plot, weak villains, and just trying too hard to play homage to the original films. Now, Star Trek Beyond, I'll freely admit, is a film that has script problems, has a weak villain. But this was a film that even within its flaws allowed me to have fun and enjoy it. And guess what it just comes down to is I'll take the flawed, entertaining experience over the flawed experience that I just simply didn't enjoy. Now, as far as the story goes, at the end of Star Trek Into Darkness, the crew of the Enterprise was about to set off on their 5-year mission, which was essentially what we saw in the original series. This film picks up 3 years later, so they're now 3 years into this mission. Kind of gotten routine, you know. They go to a planet, they do some negotiating or exploring, and then they move on to the next one. And their first sort of break from this routine is that they're able to go stop over at this brand new, gigantic space station that the Federation has built. There's literally millions of people living there from all over the Federation, and they're there for a little while, but the Enterprise is ultimately sent on this rescue mission to rescue this crew that had crash landed on this planet in the middle of this nebula. So they go off, and basically as soon as they enter this system, the action of this movie begins, and it pretty much does not stop until the movie's over. I mean, this is a very fast-paced action movie. And that's probably a good word for this movie. This is a Star Trek action movie. I would imagine probably the closest we've come to a straight-up action movie in the Star Trek franchise would be Star Trek First Contact. And I've used the analogy, if you are familiar with the original movies, that this pretty much has the action of Star Trek First Contact and the just comic relief and insanity that was Star Trek A Voyage Home. Simon Pegg adds a lot of comic relief, whether it's dialogue, situations, but it never gets so overblown that it pulls you out of the movie. That was a complaint I had with the Ghostbusters reboot. We're not to that level, but you can just tell that everyone that was in the process of making this movie was having fun with it. And that comes across to the audience. And as I said, it was just a movie that I just really enjoyed. There are flaws. There are story problems. The villain is passable. There's a new character introduced, Jayla, and she's played by Sofia Boutella. You probably know her as Gazelle from the Kingsman movie. And she's a fun addition, an enjoyable character, but there are times where she almost feels like a Mary Sue, and if you're not familiar with that term, it's basically every time there was a situation that they needed help, it turned out she kind of had some skills to help them out of that, and it became a little obvious as we got towards the end of the movie. But for the most part, the script problems I can forgive here where I really couldn't in Star Trek Into Darkness. And I'm not a fan of shooting low, but this was a movie that knew it was an action movie first. Unlike Star Trek Into Darkness, where it was trying to be a much more high-minded, almost political drama at times. And when you fail at that, it's a lot more noticeable than when you're not as on point in an action movie. So that's one of the reasons why I can kind of forgive some of the story problems that I'm knocked Star Trek Into Darkness a lot harder on. Now, the one thing that was a little disappointing was the actual production of this film did not feel as strong as the previous two. Justin Lin has made some really entertaining Fast and Furious movies. Fast 5 for me is honestly, I think, the best movie in the franchise, including the first one. It's an excellent heist movie, an excellent car chase movie. That's just a really, really well-made movie. Here, again, Abrams is no longer directing, so first off, the lens flares are out. But just some of the production, like the special effects, I thought were noticeably not on point in a number of cases in this, especially compared to the previous two, which I thought the special effects were downright flawless in those movies. And then the camera work. There's a lot of close combat fisticuffs, for the lack of a better word. And the action is, there's a lot of shaky cam, a lot of quick cuts, to the point that there was a number of times where I had trouble keeping track of what exactly was happening. And it's just, it's noticeable, especially as these action beats pick up going into the third act. That was utterly unnecessary. And the one thing that I, above all else, that I really can't forgive, bad shaky cam is just pretty much unforgivable at this point. And unless you're Paul Greenglass and you're directing a Jason Bourne movie, you should not be doing any kind of handheld / shaky cam. Just don't. So that's pretty much this film's biggest unforgivable sin, and the one that really did get a little annoying by the end. But again, the story problems and the other things that crop up, I could forgive, because this film is just fun. It's pure entertainment. And as I said earlier, if you're a Star Trek fan and a fan of the higher brow science fiction that we sometimes get from these movies, and you're disappointed that's not there, I have no argument. That's fine. Just, you need to know going in that this is not that movie. If you can go in with the expectations of a fun Star Trek action movie, and the idea of that is appealing, I think you're going to come out of this movie having just as much fun as I did. So it's a pretty simple review. It's fun. As I said, you heard that word a lot in this review. So if you've seen it, let me know what you think. Were you disappointed that it wasn't as highbrow as some of the others, or were you just able to sit back and enjoy a solid, fun summer action movie that had some really good Star Trek characters in it? As always, you can subscribe to my channel, check out some of my other reviews, and until next time, I'll see you at the movies.